Alright, so next up is composite functions with inverse. Here's a quick chart that I made. You can take a picture of this, use it whenever you need to. It is really helpful, but I would also like for you to memorize it, so I made up this one little acronym kind of thing. So, first of all, sine. The restrictions for sine is in the eastern hemisphere, and this is arcsine, which is the inverse of sine. The inverse of cosine is in the northern hemisphere, and the arctan is in the eastern hemisphere. So if you can think of South Korea and Thailand in the eastern hemisphere, and Canada is in the northern hemisphere. Cosine Canada, tan Thailand, sine South Korea. So let's get started with our first problem. Alright, so sine, inverse of sine pi over 3. Whenever you have the same function, you can pretty much just cancel it out, and this is the answer. So the answer of this is pi over 3. But to explain it, let's do the problem in the long way. The sine pi over 3 is root 3 over 2. Using my unit circle. And the arc sine of root 3 over 2 is, you figure this out by using the restrictions. Arc sine is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, which is in the eastern hemisphere. So the sine of root 3 over 2 is both in pi over 3 and in 5 pi over 3, which is down here. Okay. But remember, because South Korea is in the eastern hemisphere, we can only allow the eastern hemisphere solution to work. So, which would be pi over 3? So the sine of root 3 over 2 is both pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. But since South Korea is in the eastern hemisphere, our restrictions are negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, which pi over 3 falls in that range. So therefore, our solution is pi over 3. Okay, our next problem, dealing with cosine. So the cosine of 4 pi over 5 would be in between 3 pi over 4 and 5 pi over 6. 4 pi over 5 is 144 degrees. Remember, when you have the same inverse function, you can cancel them out and have 4 pi over 5 is the answer. Let's double check to make sure it's in our range. Cosine, Canada, the northern hemisphere. It is in the northern hemisphere. Alright, let's move on. So to composites with no solution, you gotta be very careful of your restrictions and your ranges of where your inverses are. So make sure you know this. Okay, so I'm gonna do it the long way just to show each step of it and that no solutions are actually no solutions. Okay, so cosine 5 pi over 3. 5 pi over 3 cosine is 1/2. The cosine, or the inverse cosine of 1/2. Our ranges are from 0 to pi. 5 pi over 3 is in the southern hemisphere of the unit circle. So, therefore, this is no solution. Alright, so the inverse of tangent of 3 pi over 4. So once again, we can say tangent of tangent cancel, the answer is 3 pi over 4, right? But don't forget your ranges. Tangent, Thailand in the eastern hemisphere is over here, but 3 pi over 4 is in the western hemisphere, therefore it is no solution. And you're gonna want to really memorize this chart, or else during tests and during quizzes, you're gonna struggle and you're gonna try to find where the ranges are, but you don't want to do that last minute. So have it memorized. So enough of radians, let's get to degrees. Composite functions with degrees, same steps except for the last one. So sine of 1/2 is in pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. Once again, sine, South Korea in the Eastern Hemisphere. So looking at our beautiful unit circle, 5 pi over 6 is in the Western Hemisphere, so therefore pi over 6 is our answer. But that's not our final answer. If you have a unit circle with you at hand during tests and quizzes, you can just look at the chart and see pi over 6 is 30 degrees. That's our final answer. But let's just say they give you pi over 6, the radians. Remember, we can cancel out these two and have pi over 6 as our answer. But if they want the answer in degrees, and you don't have a unit circle, one thing you can do is multiply it by 180 over pi. Pi's cancel. 180 divided by 6 equals 30. Same answer. Alright, so cosine pi over 2 is just 0. That's our final answer, guys. Nope, just kidding. Imagine if we could have all our answers as 0. Anyways, cosine pi over 2 is 0. And we don't even need this information. Remember, we can cancel out and get pi over 2. But we need it in degrees. Pi over 2 is 90 degrees. And once again, let's say they give you the cosine of a function, like the actual solution. In case they give you cosine of 0, which I'm pretty sure they won't, all you gotta do is get 0, look at your unit circle, and figure out that's pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. Alright, so for solving inverse trig equations, it's just basic algebra in your unit circle. So I'll give you 4 questions. The first one is -4 arctan x equals pi. So first we're just gonna bring over the 4 to the other side by dividing the -4. And that will get us -pi over 4. According to our rules, we can just bring the tan over to the other side and have x equals tan over -pi over 4. So bring out the beautiful unit circle. -pi over 4 is 7 pi over 4, and which is root 2 over 2 divided by -root 2 over 2, which is just -1. So x equals -1. Alright, the next question looks a little more complicated, but once again, it's just our basic algebra. Alright, so the first step we're going to do is take the 3 to the other side by dividing it, which leaves us with tangent of -1 over x minus pi over 2 equals pi over 3. Alright, so once again, we can just flip this by bringing the tangent to the other side, which would be tangent of pi over 3. Alright, so take our beautiful unit circle, and before we bring the before we add the pi over 2 to the other side, we're going to figure out what tangent of pi over 3 is. So right now it looks like tangent of pi over 3 is root 3. And then finally we can add it over and get our final answer of x equals root 3 plus pi over 2. Alright, for the third question, basically just do the same thing that we're doing, but maybe a few more steps added on. Alright, so we're gonna subtract the 2 arc cosine 3x on both sides which gets us 2 arc cosine of 3x minus 2 pi equals 0. But we'll add the 2 pi over, which leaves us with 2 arc cosine of 3x equals 2 pi. Now we just gotta divide both sides by 2, which cancels out this 2 and this 2, and leaves us with arc cosine of 3x equals pi. And once again, this arc is the same thing as cosine of -1, which is our inverse. So we'll bring the 3x over, set it equal to pi, and flip our cosine the other side, which will get us to x equals cosine of pi over 3. Let's see what our beautiful unit circle says. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. So therefore, x equals 1/2. All right. This one, once again, a little more complicated, but not as hard as you think it is. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do, as you see, this and this is the same thing. So we're gonna subtract this, which will get us 3 sine x plus pi minus 2 pi equals -3 pi. Add the 2 pi over. Which will get us -pi. And now we'll divide the 3 on both sides. Which gets us a -pi over 3. Okay, now we're gonna take the sign over the other side, which will leave us to x plus pi equals sine of, sorry, that's a -pi over 3, so sine of -pi over 3. And beautiful unit circle. What does this tell us? Sine of -pi over 3 is -3 over 2. Oh. -3 over 2, and bring the pi over, got us our final answer of -3 over 2 minus pi. And by the way, before you add the left side over, if the remaining left side, always make sure you figure out the sine, cosine, or tangent, and then get your final answer of bringing it over.